Hi there, my name is Sage Jankowitz. I am a Cambridge-based real estate broker focused on sales in Somerville and Cambridge, Massachusetts. As of this video in 2025, I have closed over 700 sell, buy, and rent transactions in the last 7 years. In today's video, I wanted to talk specifically to Somerville Sellers. And to start, I want to put on my buyer cap for a second and kind of think about things from the eyes of a Somerville buyer. And so, one of the things I like to think about is as a Somerville buyer, what are they sort of thinking about? Where are they finicky? What do they really care about? And so, the first thing is kind of understanding who is your typical Somerville buyer. And what I find is that sort of one of the main demographics graphics tends to be younger, well informed buyers. Oftentimes, they are renting locally currently and they're looking to buy their first property. So they tend to have a very, very strong understanding of Somerville, of the different communities and neighborhoods in Somerville. They often also understand Cambridge. And they often do a lot of research and they have a good sense of the data. So they know oftentimes what is a good deal, what is a bad deal, what is an average deal. And they're often comparing prices in Somerville to Cambridge. So you have to be really careful as a Somerville seller not to price your property like it's a Cambridge property, which I see quite a bit. Because Somerville buyers often will sniff that right out and say, why would I pay that amount when I can get something similar and be in Cambridgeport? One of the reasons they're looking in Somerville is to get typically some kind of discount in comparison to Cambridge. So I think that's a very important dynamic to be aware of. Um, and if a Somerville buyer feels early on in the process when they go to your home that the price is inflated, and it could be in relation to Cambridge, it could be because you're marketing a home in some way that isn't accurate, which I'll get into in a second. But whatever it is, if the pricing feels inflated, I find that Somerville buyers tend to move on very quickly and check out. So you have to be very careful with your pricing and make sure that you're pricing in a way that feels fair in the eye of your typical Somerville buyer. But let's get deeper here, which is around sort of honest marketing. I see this a lot. A lot of Somerville sellers or their agents are not being particularly honest. And the reality is, most Somerville buyers are very educated, just sort of in a general sense, but also in the Somerville market. And so here are some examples that I see. A very typical layout in Somerville might have a living room and dining room. And oftentimes I see sellers, basically they turn their living room into a quote unquote bedroom and turn their dining room into a living room. Buyers don't like this. They don't like to go on a Saturday to look at a home that's marketed as a two bed, and then they realize it's basically a living room, dining room, and a one bedroom apartment. It really pisses them off, and they'll oftentimes leave. So you have to be really careful in the way that you market the number of bedrooms and other spaces that you have. You also don't want to market a room as a bedroom when it's really a 7 by 7 office. If you have an investment property, and this could be a condo that could be marketed to investors, or it could be a multifamily. Somerville buyers do not like when you have aspirational rent numbers. I see this all the time. They say, "Oh, this could rent for $4,500." Well, I've rented many hundreds of units in Somerville, and oftentimes, the rental numbers are aspirational and not realistic. And most Somerville buyers are often renters themselves or were renters and have a decent sense of the rental market in Somerville. So if you're providing unrealistic numbers, you're going to quickly turn off those buyers and they're going to say, "What else is this seller lying about? I am moving on." Another thing that I see a lot is I see units that are sort of marketed as first floor units, and they may actually be a first floor unit, or it may in fact be a garden level or a basement unit. And then the buyer gets there and say, wait, this isn't what was promised. So in my experience, it's better to be totally honest in your marketing and be transparent. Another thing is around condition. I see this a lot. A seller has a great property. It's a block from Davis Square, but it's in poor condition. The layout is very funky. The kitchens and bathrooms haven't been changed in 30, 40 years. That is totally fine, but you need to make sure that the price is discounted to reflect that. Somerville buyers are okay with older condition properties, but they want to see that reflected in the price. And most buyers that are purchasing in Somerville will decide to make those updates after they purchase, but they want to make sure there's a discount there so that they can do the work after they buy. They're not going to buy something priced like it's turnkey when it really is not. Another thing, and this is a really, really big one, for Somerville buyers is location matters on a micro level in Somerville. And so an example that I think of a lot is you can look at properties on one side of Broadway and Winter Hill, and the other side of, which is like one side on Foss Park, and then the other side, which is more Gilman Square. What you're generally going to find is if you have two properties that are exactly the same on Broadway, one side closer to Gilman Square, the other closer to Foss Park, you could see a difference in value of 25, 50, 100,000 plus in value for the exact same property. So you could be a tenth of a mile away and have a very different understanding of price. And again, Somerville buyers understand this stuff for the most part. So you have to be very, very careful of how you price depending on precisely where you're located. And resulting to another thing around location is around T proximity. Okay, and so the closer you are to the T in Somerville, generally the higher price you are going to get. So if you're 20 minutes plus away from the T walking, generally you are going to see longer days on market and lower prices for compared to another property that otherwise is exactly the same but closer to the T. And this also will have an exponential effect. As you get closer to the T and you're 3, 4, 5 minutes away, generally you're going to see a higher price than a similar property that's 15 minutes away. So proximity to the T really matters in the eyes of Somerville buyers. And then finally, parking. And this really matters in my experience, specifically when you're either targeting a larger home that you're selling, so a 3 or 4 bed plus condo or a single family. Usually properties without parking will suffer here and take a hit. But it also can matter even for like 2 bed units or even 1 bed units if they're a luxury unit and really high end. So if you don't have parking, you need to make sure you're accurately factoring that into your pricing. Somerville buyers will be turned off and expect to pay less if it doesn't have parking and it's one of those types of housing stock. All right, now let's shift gears a little bit here and talk about what Somerville sellers tend to be lazy about in my experience. The first one is under prepping. And the way that I see this manifest is particularly for those Somerville owners who are selling that are very close to the T. Maybe they're in more premium areas in Somerville, such as Davis Square or Porter Square. They often say, this is a prime Somerville location. Therefore, I can price my property at Cambridge level pricing. Well, Somerville buyers will punish you hard for this move, in my experience. Your property isn't a Cambridge property; it's a Somerville property, even if it's in Davis Square. And so, you really need to make sure that you properly prep the property if you want to get premium prices that come anywhere close to Cambridge level pricing. So you need to really think about doing the right things, and I can help guide you on what those things look like to make sure you're getting your maximum ROI. The second thing I see quite a bit with Somerville sellers is a lot of times they have a cluttered home, they want to leave their stuff there, they don't want to take it out and go through the tricky process of removing all that furniture. But the reality is overstuffed rooms can destroy sales price. 2 examples that I see quite a bit. I see single families and it just has way too much furniture. It has a huge king bed with massive end tables and 4 dressers and all this other stuff. And it makes a room that otherwise will feel spacious for Somerville standards feel really, really tight. The other common example I see is an office that has just become a dumping zone and it just has a bunch of crap in there. And the reality is, that could be a room that could look like a nice office in the eyes of a Somerville buyer, but if you don't get your stuff out of there, it won't. And this brings me to my next point. You must stage your home. And a lot of Somerville sellers get lazy here. They don't want to pay for the staging, but unstaged homes often feel smaller, messier, and more confusing in the eyes of a Somerville buyer. You want to show the absolute best potential, and you can take a small office space and a good stager will make that look beautiful and stunning, and a buyer will fall in love with that space. But if you don't take the actual step of getting your stuff out and making it properly staged, you will be leaving substantial cash on the table, guaranteed. And then the final thing is you really need to have a good marketing story. You need to understand my home is marketed to who? Is it an owner occupant? Is it a family? Is it a young professional? Is it an individual person? Is it going to be an investor? Is the investor going to be living there or not living there? All these factors will impact who you're selling the home to, which impacts how you prepare the home. For example, what light fixtures you put in place, what finishes you put in place, how the home is staged, what spaces are used for what. Is that small room an office or is it a kid's playroom? All these things matter. So understanding how to market the home is super important. A lot of Somerville sellers and their agents don't take the time to think this through, and it ultimately will impact how buyers get excited and how much you sell the property for. Next, I want to shift gears again and talk a little bit about how the city of Somerville in particular makes selling harder. The first thing is around permitting. And if you've been around Somerville, you probably know that Somerville has a reputation for making the permitting process extremely difficult. It can be very hard to close out permits. A lot of ticky-tack things can come up. So generally I advise if you can do work to prepare your home without pulling permits, it's usually the smartest way to go when selling your home, but it does honestly depend. Sometimes it is worth going through that process, and I can help you with that process and help you close out any open permits to make sure you have a smooth process. If you have open permits, it can affect your ability to list the home quickly or ultimately sell the home. A buyer can flag that and delay the closing. The other thing is around city records. Somerville has, I'd say, a mixed bag reputation when it comes to their city records. In some ways, they can be decent. One way that I've seen there be issues is around discrepancies between a home on the assessor site versus the building department. And ultimately, the building department always wins. So if you have a property that in the Somerville tax assessor's database says is listed as a 3-family, you still need to call the building department and understand, is it actually a 3-family? There's been many scenarios where I've seen a property listed as a 3-family, for example, in the assessor's site. You call the building department, you realize it's actually a 2-family. Well, that's going to have a massive impact on how you market the property or what it's ultimately going to sell for. I can help you navigate all those things, of course. Now, how does Somerville make selling easier? Well, the first thing is there is great buyer demand. You have a ton of first-time home buyers who are currently renting, looking to enter the Somerville market. You have a lot of locals who are currently in the Somerville market looking to downsize or upsize. Maybe they're in a small condo, they want to get into a bigger condo. Maybe they're in a big single family and they want to get into a smaller condo. You also have a lot of Cambridge spillover, people that are looking in Cambridge, but after a while they decide that they're just priced out of the market, or they're currently in Cambridge and they're looking to downsize to a more affordable option. So you tend to have really strong buyer demand from a lot of different types of buyers, although I will say I find young professionals to make up the largest segment overall. The next way that I think Somerville can make things easier, I have found that because there's such high demand, when you do the right things, which is price fairly, prepare the home correctly, stage the home, and market to the right demo. When you do all those things right, generally the homes will sell fast in Somerville, typically within a couple weeks, and usually with strong interest at a good price. That is not always the case for a lot of other surrounding communities around Somerville. And then the last thing that I would just end on when it comes to making Somerville, what makes Somerville easier to sell, it's the neighborhood identity. Somerville has a lot of different squares. It has a lot of different neighborhoods. Each one has its own kind of vibe. And there's different flavors for different buyer types. And so really leaning into the neighborhood identity of where you are and how to market to the demo that those neighborhoods tend to attract, I find can really result in strong buyer interest. Sometimes a lot of other neighbors in that area might have friends or family, or they may themselves be interested, I found over the years. So understanding your identity and how to sell that to prospective buyers can have a giant impact on selling your property. I think at the end of the day, what it really comes down to in Somerville is you can't be lazy. You can't be vague. You need to be specific. You need to have a plan that matches where you are in Somerville and who your ideal buyer is. I'll help you with all that stuff. If you're thinking of selling in Somerville your property, give me a call. My number is 617-833-7457.